I never thought my life at 61 would look like this. Sleeping on a fold-out couch in my daughter's living room. My entire existence reduced to 2 suitcases tucked out of sight. Just 6 months ago, I was Helen Carter, wife of 32 years, living in a house I had poured my soul into. Then came the divorce papers, cold and final, after my husband decided he preferred the company of his young assistant. With nowhere else to go, I accepted my daughter Lily's offer to stay temporarily in her apartment with her husband Ethan. I told myself it would be a fresh start, a place to heal while I figured out what to do next. But healing was hard to come by, in a home that felt more like enemy territory than a sanctuary. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. From the first night, I knew the arrangement came with unspoken rules, all of them designed to make me feel like an intruder. I couldn't use their sleek chrome coffee maker because it was a wedding gift from Ethan's mother's sentimental value, Lily explained with a tight smile. Shoes were forbidden on the plush beige carpet, even for the 3 steps it would take to reach the couch at night. Cooking anything with a lingering smell, as Ethan called it, was off limits, which meant my favorite homemade chicken soup was suddenly unacceptable. I learned quickly to tiptoe around their routines. Never shower before they were done. Never leave dishes in the sink. Never disturb the curated piece of their picture-perfect life. But rules were one thing, distance was another. They spoke in hushed tones behind the closed door of their bedroom, and the air between us grew colder with each passing day. The final blow came one morning over instant coffee, the only kind I was allowed to make. Lily looked up from her phone, her voice almost casual, and said, "If you want to be comfortable, Mom, maybe you should have stayed with Dad." The words hit like a physical slap, stripping away whatever scraps of dignity I'd been clinging to. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a declaration that I was no longer welcome. I smiled tightly, swallowing the sting, but inside, something cracked. I spent that afternoon staring out the window at the city street below, wondering how the daughter I had raised, who I had stayed up with through fevers, heartbreaks, and every scraped knee, could see me now as nothing more than a burden. The couch beneath me felt like a lifeboat in a storm I hadn't prepared for, and every unspoken rule was another wave threatening to pull me under. Somewhere deep inside, I promised myself that if I ever found a way out of this, I would never, ever allow anyone to make me feel this small again. That afternoon, after another awkward breakfast in Lily's kitchen, instant coffee for me, almond milk lattes for them, I decided I needed to get out of the apartment before I said something I couldn't take back. The air inside felt stale, thick with unspoken tension, so I grabbed my purse and walked the 3 blocks to the little corner market I'd discovered my first week here. Patel's grocery wasn't much to look at. Flickering neon sign, shelves crammed with more goods than they were ever meant to hold. But the owner, Raj Patel, had a warm smile and a way of remembering people's names. In a city where I'd never felt more invisible, that mattered. He greeted me like an old friend, asking about the weather, the neighborhood, even how I was settling in. I didn't have the heart to tell him that settling in meant counting the hours until I could go to sleep and not feel the weight of Lily and Ethan's polite indifference. I picked up the usual, a single can of soup, a small loaf of bread, and a pint of milk. It was all I could store without drawing complaints about crowding the fridge. At the counter, my eyes drifted to the colorful display of lottery tickets, a rainbow of thin paper promises. The big sign in the corner caught my attention. Powerball jackpot. $4 million. $4 million. More money than I'd seen in my entire life. More than I'd ever dared to imagine. Mr. Patel must have seen something in my expression, because he leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "You feeling lucky today, Mrs. Carter?" His voice was warm, teasing, but not unkind. I looked down at the crumpled $10 bill in my hand, my budget for the next 2 days. It was supposed to cover either gas for the car Lily let me borrow once a week, or a few groceries. I had no business wasting it on a 1 in 100 million chance. But something about the way my life had been compressed into this tiny existence, timed showers, restricted coffee, rules for how I could stand on the carpet, made the idea of a small rebellion irresistible. "Why not?" I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mister." Patel fed the ticket into the machine, and it spat out a slip of paper with a string of numbers. 9, 17, 24, 36, 44, Powerball 11. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet, right next to my expired credit card and the worn photo of Lily on her first day of kindergarten. That night, Lily and Ethan went out to dinner, some work thing for Ethan. Though I noticed Lily dressed like it was more than just a casual evening. I heated my can of soup in the microwave and sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through channels without really seeing anything. My mind kept drifting back to the ticket in my wallet. At exactly 10:59 p.m., during the commercial break, the local station cut to the live Powerball drawing. I watched the numbered balls tumble in their glass case, bouncing against each other like tiny moons in orbit. The first one dropped. 9. My heart gave a little jump. The second, 17. A strange tightness gripped my chest. Third, 24. Fourth, 36. My hands began to shake. Fifth, 44. My breath caught. Then, the Powerball. 11. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, then at the numbers printed on my ticket, then back again. Every single one matched. Every single one. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My brain tried to convince me I was imagining things, that I'd read the numbers wrong, that surely there was some mistake. I read them again and again. My hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled. $4 million. After taxes, maybe 2.8 million, enough to buy my own place. Enough to never sleep on anyone's couch again. Enough to rewrite the rest of my life. And no one knew. That was the most intoxicating part. This win was mine alone, untainted by anyone else's expectations, rules, or judgments. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the faint buzz of traffic from the street below, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. I sat there in the dim light, the lottery ticket resting on the coffee table in front of me like a loaded weapon. In the wrong hands, it could vanish, spent foolishly, stolen, leveraged by people who saw me as an easy target. I knew instinctively that if Lily or Ethan found out, they would see it not as my second chance, but as an opportunity for themselves. They'd wrap it in the language of helping the family. But I knew better. I thought about waking up tomorrow and saying nothing, carrying on as if tonight had never happened. The thought of quietly disappearing began to form in my mind. No dramatic confrontations, no explanations. Just gone. They would wake up to an empty couch, my suitcases missing, and no idea where I had gone. I imagined them calling my phone, the calls going to voicemail, their confusion turning to irritation, then maybe, just maybe, regret. But that was a luxury for later. First, I had to protect the ticket. I took it to my small suitcase, pulled out the secret zipper pocket, and slid it inside an envelope with my name scrawled across the front. Then, after hesitating, I signed the back in firm, deliberate strokes. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay there listening to every creak of the building, every car passing on the street below, my mind racing through possibilities. I could buy a small house somewhere quiet. I could take a trip I'd only ever seen in magazines. I could invest and make sure I'd never have to depend on anyone again. And yet, woven into the excitement was something darker, a sharp-edged satisfaction at the thought of never again needing to ask my own daughter's permission to make coffee or boil a pot of soup. I wasn't proud of that feeling, but I didn't push it away either. It was a reminder of how far I'd been pushed. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I'd made up my mind. I would go to the lottery office as soon as it opened. I'd choose the lump sum. No way. I was waiting decades for my money. Once the check cleared, I'd disappear. Not forever, maybe, but long enough to build something entirely my own. Long enough to ensure that the next time Lily and Ethan saw me, it would be on my terms. I could almost taste the freedom, sharp and sweet, like biting into the first apple of the season. When Lily and Ethan returned from their dinner, I was still on the couch, the television flickering with late-night reruns. They didn't ask what I'd done while they were out. They never did. Lily brushed past me with a mumbled, "Good night," and Ethan didn't say a word. I watched them retreat to their bedroom, the door clicking shut, and felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about tomorrow. Tomorrow was mine. I turned off the television, folded the thin blanket I'd been using, and placed it neatly on the back of the couch. In the dim light of the apartment, the coffee table gleamed faintly, bare now that the ticket was tucked away safely. I whispered to myself, "They have no idea," and felt the corners of my mouth curve into a small, private smile. By this time next week, my life would be unrecognizable, and no one, least of all Lily and Ethan, would see it coming. The check from the lottery cleared 5 days later, and just like that, the financial chains I'd worn, my entire adult life fell away. I didn't tell a soul. Not Lily, not Ethan, not even Mr. Patel, who'd sold me the winning ticket. I signed the necessary forms at the lottery office, arranged for the lump sum to be deposited into a new account under my name alone, and then quietly began researching rural properties. I wanted space, open skies, quiet mornings, and no one telling me which appliances I could use or how long my showers could be. 2 weeks later, I found it. 35 acres of rolling pasture on the edge of a small town, 3 hours away, with an old but sturdy farmhouse, a weathered red barn, and a small detached cottage. The listing photos showed peeling paint, outdated fixtures, and a kitchen that hadn't seen a remodel since the early 82nd. Most buyers would have turned away. I saw potential. I saw freedom. I called the realtor, offered full asking price in cash, and requested a 30-day closing with no contingencies. By the time Lily and Ethan were sipping their morning coffee in their polished kitchen, I was signing the papers that made the farm mine. The first time I drove up the long gravel driveway in the used SUV I'd bought under my new LLC, the sight of that land took my breath away. The fields shimmered in the late afternoon sun, tall grasses swaying gently in the breeze. The barn doors hung slightly crooked, but the structure was solid. The farmhouse smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the kind of scent that whispers history instead of mildew. I ran my hand along the banister of the worn staircase, imagining the lives that had passed through here, and decided mine would be the next. The detached cottage, a simple 2-bedroom with a small kitchen and cramped living room, was perfect for a caretaker. I didn't know yet who that would be, but I knew I'd find the right person. My vision for the property came together quickly. I wanted to turn it into a rescue haven for abandoned and neglected animals, a place where they could heal and live out their days in peace. But I also saw the potential for a small retreat, a place for city dwellers to rent a guest room or a section of the property for a weekend, breathe fresh country air, and maybe learn something about compassion in the process. I set up a modest but functional business plan, dusting off the economics degree I'd earned decades earlier, before marriage and motherhood had rerouted my life. Within a week of closing, I had contractors repairing the barn roof, replacing broken fencing, and updating the farmhouse plumbing and electrical. The cottage needed new flooring and paint, but nothing that couldn't be handled in a few days. I bought secondhand furniture from estate sales and thrift stores, mixing solid, well-made pieces with the occasional vintage find that gave the place character. I paid every invoice promptly, not because I wanted to flaunt my new wealth, but because I remembered what it felt like to wait on someone else's timing before you could pay your own bills. It was during a trip to the local feed store that I met Sophie. She was standing at the counter, animatedly explaining to the clerk why the nutritional needs of a malnourished goat were different from those of a healthy one. I waited until she was done, before stepping forward to ask if she had any experience working on a farm. Her face lit up when I told her about my rescue plans. She was 24, in her final year of veterinary school, and looking for a live-in arrangement where she could exchange part-time work for housing. I offered her the caretaker's cottage, a small stipend, and the chance to help shape the rescue from the ground up. She moved in 2 days later with 2 suitcases, a battered laptop, and a rescued tabby cat named Pepper. From the moment she arrived, Sophie was a whirlwind of energy and ideas. She helped me source reputable animal feed suppliers, contacted the local shelter to set up a partnership, and even started a social media account for the rescue, something I'd never have thought to do. Within a month, we had our first residents. 3 horses rescued from an abandoned boarding stable, 2 elderly goats, and a small parade of dogs and cats who needed a safe place to land. Sophie handled the veterinary side, and I managed the operations, tracking expenses, organizing feeding schedules, and planning future improvements. The financial side of the business became my private passion. With my winnings, I'd set aside a portion in a high-yield savings account and another in low-risk investments. I bought a foreclosed duplex in town, renovated it, and rented it out to provide steady income. I purchased an adjoining 10-acre plot that I planned to use for expanding pasture space. Every decision was deliberate, every dollar accounted for. I'd lived too long without control over my own resources to ever be careless again. I woke up each morning before sunrise, the cool air filling my lungs as I stepped outside to the sounds of the farm, waking up horses nickering, roosters crowing, Pepper weaving around my ankles. There was no one to tell me what I could or couldn't do. No passive-aggressive comments about boundaries or appropriate use of the space. The land was mine. The work was mine. And for the first time in decades, the life was mine. By the 3rd month, the rescue had become more than just a project. It was a living, breathing reflection of who I was becoming. Sophie and I ran it like a partnership. She handled the animals' daily care and medical needs, while I managed the books, oversaw property improvements, and dealt with guests who rented rooms in the farmhouse for weekend getaways. Word spread quickly, and soon we had a waiting list of animals to take in, and visitors eager to spend a few nights on the property. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings after the chores were done, I'd sit on the farmhouse porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the tree line. I'd think about the couch in Lily's living room, about the unspoken rules in that one sentence. If you want to be comfortable, maybe you should have stayed with Dad. I'd let the bitterness wash over me for just a moment, then let it go. Not because I forgave them, but because I had something better now. I had proof that I could build a life entirely on my own terms. Sophie liked to tease me about being the most hands-on millionaire she'd ever met. She'd say it when she caught me mucking stalls or hauling feed sacks instead of hiring someone else to do it. But I didn't mind the work. Each task, no matter how small, was another brick in the foundation of this new life. I'd built one that no one could take away from me. In the back of my mind, I knew it was only a matter of time before Lily and Ethan discovered where I'd gone and what I'd done. I wasn't hiding, exactly, but I also wasn't making it easy for them to find me. When that day came, I wanted to be ready not just with words, but with something tangible. A life so solid, so undeniably mine, that their opinions would carry no weight at all. And as the weeks turned into months, I found myself less interested in revenge and more invested in the quiet satisfaction of independence. The farm was thriving, the rescue was growing, and the life I'd thought was over was just beginning. 6 months into my new life at the farm, the rescue was thriving. The fields were green with early summer growth, and the air carried the easy rhythm of work I actually wanted to do. Sophie and I had settled into a comfortable routine: mornings with the animals, afternoons handling paperwork or greeting visitors, evenings on the porch watching the sun dip low. I'd almost stopped wondering when Lily would call, when Ethan would appear in my inbox asking for a favor. Almost. But that morning, the answer came in the form of a silver SUV creeping up the gravel driveway, a U-Haul trailer hitched to the back. Even from the porch, I could see the layers of road dust on the vehicle, the exhaustion in the way it moved, like its driver had been going too far, too fast, for too long. I set down my coffee cup and shaded my eyes. As the SUV drew closer, I recognized the shape of Lily's shoulders through the windshield, the familiar tilt of her head when she was concentrating. Beside her, Ethan looked hollowed out, his once polished hair hanging limp against his forehead. The sight of them pulled a knot tight in my chest, not quite anger, not quite pity. When they finally stopped in front of the main house, the engine idled for a moment before cutting off. The silence that followed was heavy. Lily was the first to get out. She was thinner than I remembered, her expensive clothes wrinkled from long hours on the road. Her eyes darted over the farmhouse, the barn, the fields, taking it all in but avoiding my face. Ethan followed more slowly, glancing at Sophie, who had appeared in the doorway behind me, wiping her hands on her work jeans. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Mom," Lily said finally, her voice thin, almost hoarse. We need help." I waited. Let her speak. Ethan cleared his throat. "We lost our jobs. First me, then Lily. The bank foreclosed on the condo. We tried to find something else, but there's nothing we can afford. Not with the baby coming." My eyes flicked to Lily's midsection. She was showing now, the gentle curve of her stomach pressing against the fabric of her blouse. In another life, I might have stepped forward, laid a hand there, felt the kick of new life. But too much had happened for that kind of easy gesture. "I see," I said. "And what exactly are you asking?" "We need a place to stay," Lily said quickly, as though rushing through the words would make them easier to hear. "Just until we can get back on our feet." I let the request hang between us, the warm breeze rustling the leaves in the nearby oak trees. Then I stepped off the porch and started walking toward the cottage at the edge of the property. "Follow me," I said. Sophie's eyebrows lifted, but she stayed silent, slipping back inside as I led Lily and Ethan down the worn path toward the small white building with green shutters. The caretaker's cottage. Sophie had moved into the main house a month earlier to be closer to the animals and have more space, leaving the cottage empty. It wasn't much: a small living room, a compact kitchen, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, and a bathroom that had seen better decades. But it was clean, functional, and most importantly, separate from my own space. "This is where you'll stay," I said, unlocking the door and stepping aside so they could enter. Lily's face fell almost immediately. "Here?" "Yes, here." Ethan tried to cover his disappointment with a polite nod. "It's cozy. It has everything you need." I said evenly. Running water, electricity, heat, more than many people have. Lily moved further into the living room, glancing around at the thrift store furniture and mismatched dishes in the kitchen cabinets. Her hand trailed along the chipped laminate countertop, her manicured nails catching slightly on the rough edges. She didn't meet my eyes. "This isn't permanent," I continued. "You can stay here as long as you contribute to the work that keeps this place running." Ethan looked up sharply. "Work?" "Yes, work. This is a functioning farm and animal rescue. We start at 5 a.m. Feeding, cleaning stalls, repairing fences, maintaining equipment. Everyone here pulls their weight. No exceptions. Mom, I'm 7 months pregnant." Lily protested. "Then Ethan will work twice as hard," I replied without missing a beat. "You can help Sophie with bookkeeping or food prep. There's more than enough to do." The silence that followed was taut, stretching between us like a wire ready to snap. Finally, Ethan said, "We'll do whatever we need to." I nodded once. "Good. There are a few rules you'll follow while you're here. No loud music or television. After 9 p.m., the animals don't like noise. No guests without prior approval. No alcohol on the property. And if you borrow the car for doctor's appointments or grocery runs, it's returned with a full tank of gas." "Understood?" They both murmured agreement, though Lily's eyes were fixed on a spot somewhere over my shoulder. I led them through the rest of the cottage, the small second bedroom that could work as a nursery, the bathroom with its older fixtures but spotless tiles, the utility closet with basic cleaning supplies. I kept my voice calm, almost conversational, but inside I was measuring their reactions, weighing whether they understood the position they were in. When we stepped back outside, Sophie was waiting on the path, her hands on her hips. "Do you want me to bring over bedding and towels?" she asked me, though her gaze flicked to Lily and Ethan. "Yes," I said. "And show them the morning routine tomorrow." "Of course," she said, then disappeared into the main house. Lily finally looked at me. "Mom, thank you." I studied her for a long moment. "You're here because you need a roof over your head, and I have one to offer. But don't mistake this for charity. You'll earn your keep. You'll follow the rules. And if you can't, you'll leave." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Understood." As I turned to walk back toward the main house, I heard Ethan murmur something to her low enough that he probably thought I couldn't catch it. But I did. "It's just for a little while," I smiled to myself. I'd heard those words before. That evening, I sat on the porch with Sophie, watching the last of the daylight fade over the fields. The sound of the Hall's back door clanging shut, drifted over from the cottage, followed by muffled voices as Lily and Ethan began the awkward process of fitting their comfortable city life belongings into a space that didn't care about appearances. Sophie glanced sideways at me. "You're really gonna make them work?" "Oh, they'll work," I said. "And they'll learn one way or another." She grinned. "This is gonna be interesting." I didn't say it aloud, but she was right. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not exactly. But I was interested in seeing whether my daughter and her husband could rebuild themselves the way I had. And the cottage, with its worn floors and early mornings, was the perfect place to start. The first morning in the cottage, the alarm I'd left on the small kitchen counter went off at exactly 4:45 a.m. The sound was loud and unrelenting, echoing off the narrow walls until I was sure the whole property could hear it. I'd placed it there intentionally, knowing full well that neither Lily nor Ethan had seen that hour of the morning in years. By the time I walked the short path from the farmhouse, coffee in hand, the light was on inside. Ethan stood in the doorway looking half asleep, his hair sticking up like he'd been electrocuted, while Lily sat at the small kitchen table in her robe, eyes heavy-lidded. "We start at 5, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Shoes on. Work gloves in the bin by the door. Sophie will meet you at the barn. Lily groaned, pressing a hand to her lower back. Mom, I'm 7 months pregnant. I can't be hauling hay or whatever this is. You won't be hauling hay, I said. You'll be helping Sophie with feed prep, making sure the smaller animals get their food, cleaning water troughs. Ethan will handle the heavier lifting, but both of you will be working. Oh, Ethan muttered something under his breath about city people not being cut out for farm life, and I raised an eyebrow. City people are cut out for whatever they have to do to keep a roof over their heads, I replied, my tone cool but firm. You'll figure it out. At precisely 5 a.m., Sophie appeared at the barn in her worn jeans and mud-caked boots, a bucket in each hand. She greeted them with her usual cheerful energy. Though I noticed the glint in her eye, Sophie enjoyed a challenge. And these two were exactly that. She handed Ethan a pitchfork and pointed toward Thunder's stall. Start with the big guy. Clean out the bedding, replace it with fresh straw. Keep the manure pile neat. We'll use it for compost later. Ethan stared at the pitchfork like it was a foreign object. Meanwhile, Lily stood beside a stack of feed bags, watching Sophie demonstrate how to measure out grain for the goats and smaller livestock. Make sure you don't overfill the buckets, Sophie said. Goats will gorge themselves and get sick. And you'll be the one calling the vet if that happens. Lily wrinkled her nose but took the scoop anyway. That first week was nothing short of a disaster. Ethan complained that his back hurt, that the stalls smelled like a sewer, and that his expensive sneakers weren't meant for mud. Lily, though excused from the heavier work, sighed dramatically every time she bent to refill water troughs or carry grain buckets. At night, I could hear them through the cottage's thin walls, whispered arguments about how long they could endure this. Ethan suggesting they find something else, and Lily reminding him they had no money, no apartment, and no job prospects. I didn't intervene. That was the point. By the second week, their resistance had softened, not out of sudden enthusiasm, but because exhaustion has a way of wearing down pride. Ethan learned how to muck stalls without gagging, how to repair a section of fence without calling it beneath him. He still grumbled, but I noticed the grumbles came less often, and the work got done faster. Lily began to move with a rhythm in the feed room, measuring grain without having to check the chart Sophie had taped to the wall. She even started talking to the animals, her voice softening in a way I hadn't heard in years. The rules I'd set were simple, but I enforced them with precision. No loud music or television after 9 animals don't like commotion. And neither do I. No uninvited guests. No alcohol on the property. And above all, work came first. There were no lazy mornings. No, just this once, exceptions. Sophie kept them busy with daily chores. Stacking hay bales, cleaning water troughs, checking the animals for injuries, mending worn halters, sweeping the barn aisle until it was clean enough to eat off of. It was hard, dirty work, and they were not used to it. But necessity is the greatest teacher. By the 3rd week, Ethan's soft hands were covered in blisters, and Lily's manicure had chipped down to nothing. I didn't comment on it, but I noticed she stopped trying to hide her hands in her pockets. One afternoon, after a long morning of chores, I found them sitting on the back step of the cottage, sharing a bottle of water and laughing about something Thunder had done. Apparently, he'd nudged Ethan hard enough to nearly knock him into a water trough. It wasn't a sound I'd expected to hear from them here, not after the strain of the past months. I stood far enough away that they didn't see me, just listening for a moment. It was the first sign that the sharp edges between them, and between us, might be softening. Still, they tested boundaries. The 4th week, I caught Ethan trying to skip the last round of stall checks to watch a football game on his phone. I walked right into the barn, took the phone from his hands, and pointed to the half-cleaned stall. If you have the energy for football, you have the energy to finish your work, I said, handing the phone to Sophie with instructions not to return it until the job was done. He glared, but didn't argue. Lily had her moment too. One evening she asked if her friend from the city could come visit for the weekend, because she needed some girl time. I reminded her of the no guests rule and suggested she call her friend instead. When she pouted that it was just one person, I didn't flinch. You're here to work, Lily, not to entertain, I said. If that's a problem, the door is open for you to leave. She didn't mention it again. By the 6th week, I began to see the smallest hints of change, not just in their ability to do the work, but in the way they carried themselves. Ethan's posture was straighter, his movements less hesitant. He no longer winced every time a horse snorted too close to his face. Lily, for her part, had started bringing Sophie coffee in the mornings, chatting with her about the animals' quirks, asking questions about their care. They weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but they were no longer the same brittle, self-absorbed pair who had shown up at my gate in a U-Haul. One morning, about 2 months into their stay, I watched Ethan repair a section of fence with the same focus he used to reserve for his laptop. He'd stripped off his sweatshirt in the heat, his hands moving steadily over the wood and wire. Sophie passed by and gave him a thumbs up. "Not bad for a city boy," she said. He grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead, and for the first time I saw a flash of pride in his eyes that didn't come from a paycheck or a title. The change in Lily was quieter, but no less significant. She stopped complaining about early mornings and started showing up in the barn before Sophie had to fetch her. She still moved slowly, her pregnancy demanded it, but she moved with purpose. One afternoon, I caught her scratching behind the ears of an old goat who usually avoided people. "He lets you do that?" I asked, surprised. She smiled, almost shyly. "I think he likes me," she said. "Maybe he knows I'm not going anywhere." I didn't say it aloud, but I hoped she was right. The thing about hard work is that it doesn't just build muscle, it builds humility. The early mornings, the blisters, the sore backs, they strip away the illusions of entitlement. They remind you that comfort is earned, not owed. And as much as I'd built this arrangement to teach Lily and Ethan that lesson, I found it teaching me something too, that people can surprise you if you give them the space and the discipline to change. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time since they'd arrived, I began to think they might actually make it. And though I'd never admit it to them just yet, a small, quiet part of me was starting to root for them. By the time autumn settled over the farm, painting the trees in deep reds and golds, the change in Ethan was visible in every movement he made. Gone was the hesitant, awkward man who'd flinched at the smell of the barn or complained about mud on his shoes. Now, he moved through the morning chores, with an ease that came from repetition and muscle memory, hauling hay bales without pausing to catch his breath, repairing a section of fence without asking Sophie 3 times which tools to use. I'd watch from the porch sometimes, coffee in hand, and see him working alongside Sophie, both of them moving in quiet sync. She'd hold a post steady while he drove in nails, or they'd lift a heavy water trough together, tipping it to clean the inside before filling it with fresh water. There was a rhythm there, an unspoken understanding that comes only from doing the work day after day. And when he wiped sweat from his brow or stretched his back with a satisfied sigh, there was no trace of the old Ethan who thought hard work was something to be avoided or delegated. Only a man who'd learned to respect it. Lily's transformation was quieter, but in some ways even more surprising. Sophie had been handling the rescue's bookkeeping since the beginning, tracking feed costs, vet bills, small donations from visitors. But as Lily's pregnancy progressed, I'd suggested she take on more of the administrative work. It kept her off her feet while still making her useful. And, I'll admit, part of me expected her to treat it as a chore, something to be endured rather than embraced. But within a few weeks, she'd organized Sophie's messy stacks of receipts into neat, color-coded folders, created spreadsheets that tracked expenses against donations, and even highlighted areas where we could cut costs without sacrificing care. One afternoon, she came to me with a proposal in hand. "Mom, I think we can increase revenue by offering weekend workshops," she said, setting the papers down on the kitchen table. "Things like intro to horse care or goat yoga, people will pay for the experience, and it'll bring more awareness to the rescue." I studied her notes, impressed, despite myself. She'd calculated projected costs for materials, estimated attendance based on local tourism data, and even factored in weather patterns for the best seasons to launch. "Not bad," I said finally, sliding the papers back to her. Her smile was small, but it carried a flicker of pride I hadn't seen in years. "I didn't know I was good at this," she admitted. "Numbers, planning, I kind of like it." "Then keep at it," I told her. "The animals might be the heart of this place, but the numbers are the bones. Without them, it can't stand." It wasn't just the work that was changing, it was the space between us. The sharp edges of our conversations began to dull. The defensive tone that had once colored every exchange faded, replaced by something resembling real dialogue. They started asking me questions not out of obligation, but because they wanted to know what I thought. At dinner, Ethan would sometimes tell me about a new tool he'd learned to use, or a shortcut he'd figured out for stacking hay efficiently. Lily would share updates on donations or mention an upcoming grant deadline she thought we should meet. Even small moments carried weight. One chilly morning, I found Ethan in the barn before sunrise, already halfway through the chores. "Couldn't sleep," he said, shrugging. Figured I might as well get a head start. Another day, I caught Lily crouched by the chicken coop, her coat zipped over her belly, gently coaxing a hen to come closer so she could check its wing. When she looked up and saw me watching, she didn't roll her eyes or snap that she was just helping. Instead, she smiled, genuine, unguarded. There was still the occasional friction, of course. Old habits die hard. Ethan sometimes let his temper show when a project took longer than expected. And Lily had her moments of sighing dramatically when Sophie asked her to redo the feed order because she'd mixed up quantities. But the difference now was that they didn't quit. They didn't walk away or try to bargain their way out of a task. They adjusted, corrected, and kept going. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, the three of us sat on the porch with mugs of tea. Sophie had gone into town, and the animals were settled for the night. For the first time in months, the conversation flowed easily. No barbs, no guarded tones. Lily talked about a new fundraising idea. Ethan shared a story about Thunder trying to steal his hat. And I found myself laughing, not the brittle, polite laugh I'd used back in their apartment, but something warmer, easier. At one point, Lily turned to me and said, "I didn't realize how much work it takes to keep a place like this running. I used to think you just fed the animals, and that was it." I raised an eyebrow. "And now? Now I know better," she said softly. "It's constant, and it matters." The words caught me off guard, more than I wanted to admit, because beneath them was something I'd been waiting to hear. Not necessarily an apology, but an acknowledgement, an understanding of why I'd fought so hard to build this life, and why I'd made them earn their place in it. In those moments, I began to see that the lessons were landing. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to chip away at the entitlement that had once defined them. And I realized something else too. I wasn't just teaching them about labor and humility. I was showing them that they were capable of more than they'd ever believed. By the end of the third month, the farm was running more smoothly than ever. Ethan could handle most of the maintenance without supervision, and Lily had taken over managing the rescue's online presence, posting photos of the animals, sharing updates about adoptions, even writing short stories about the more colorful residents. Her posts started drawing attention from local papers and community groups, which in turn brought in more visitors and donations. One Saturday, after a particularly successful adoption event, I found Ethan loading leftover supplies into the storage shed, while Lily finished tallying the day's earnings. She looked up as I approached, holding the clipboard like it was something precious. "We made enough today to cover the new fencing for the back pasture," she said, her eyes shining. "That's good work," I told her. She hesitated, then added, "We couldn't have done it without you." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked between them, the man who now stood a little taller because he'd earned his place, and the woman who was beginning to see value in something beyond comfort. The tension that had once been a constant hum between us was quieter now, replaced by a fragile but growing respect. That night, as I walked back to the farmhouse, I thought about how far we'd come. They were still my children in all the complicated, messy ways that word implies, but they were also becoming something else. Partners. In this place. In this work. And for the first time since they'd arrived with their U-Haul and their desperation, I believed they might actually belong here, not because I'd given them shelter, but because they'd earned it. It was a cold November afternoon when Lily finally came to the farmhouse alone. The sky outside was low and gray, the kind of day that made the fields look like they were sleeping under a blanket of frost. I was in the kitchen, sorting through a stack of invoices, when I heard the soft knock at the back door. When I opened it, she was standing there in her work jacket, hair pulled back into a loose braid, her cheeks pink from the chill. She held a manila folder against her chest, like it was a shield. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before crossing the threshold. For months now, she'd been comfortable enough to talk to me during chores or over dinner, but she rarely came into the main house on her own. That she was here now meant something. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many tense conversations had happened in the past. But this time, her eyes didn't dart away from mine. She set the folder down carefully and folded her hands in front of her. "Mom," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I need to say something I should have said a long time ago." I waited. "I was awful to you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "When you came to stay with us, I treated you like you didn't belong in your own family. I made you feel unwelcome in your most vulnerable moment. And I never stopped to think what that must have felt like. I told myself I was protecting my space. But really, I was just being selfish. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't speak right away. Apologies are easy. They're air. It's what follows them that matters. She seemed to understand my silence, because she pressed on. "I've been thinking a lot these past few months," she continued, "about how I used to see you as someone who would always be there, no matter how I treated you. I never thought about what I was giving back. Working here, helping Sophie, doing real work. It's made me realize how much I took for granted. How much I took you for granted." I sat back in my chair, studying her. This wasn't the defensive, brittle woman who had shown up with Ethan and a U-Haul. There was a different weight to her words now, a different posture in the way she held herself. She reached for the folder and slid it toward me. "I want to make this official," she said. "Ethan and I have talked about it. We'd like to stay here. Not as charity cases, not as family you feel obligated to house, but as part of the work, full-time. We'll handle management duties, overseeing operations, coordinating events, managing the books. I've drawn up a contract, so there are no misunderstandings. I opened the folder and skimmed the pages. It was surprisingly thorough. Job descriptions for both of them, clear expectations, terms for housing in the cottage, even a clause about stepping down if their performance slipped. It was professional, well thought out, and unexpected. "You've been busy," I said. Her lips curved in a faint smile. "I meant what I said. I'm good at this. I want to use that to contribute." And Ethan's finally admitted he likes the work, too. "We want to keep building what you've started." I closed the folder, resting my hands on top of it. "And what happens when you decide you don't like early mornings anymore? When you start missing the city?" "Then we'll leave," she said simply. "On good terms, and without expecting you to fix whatever comes next. But we don't want to leave, Mom. Not now. Not after what this place has given us." Her eyes were clear, her voice steady. This wasn't a plea born out of desperation like the day they'd arrived. It was a choice. I took a long breath, letting the silence stretch between us. "Lily," I said finally, "you've come a long way. But I need you to understand something. If you ever make me feel invisible again, if you treat my love or my help as something you're entitled to instead of something you're grateful for, it's over. No second chances. No explanations. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear," she said without hesitation. I studied her a moment longer, searching for any trace of the old Lily, the one who measured worth in granite countertops and scented candles. I didn't see her. Instead, I saw a woman who'd mucked stalls in the freezing dawn, who'd sat up late balancing the books, who'd learned to coax a skittish goat out of hiding with nothing but patience and quiet persistence. "Then we'll give it a try," I said, tapping the folder. "On one condition, you keep this as professional as it looks. I'm your employer when it comes to the work. The fact that I'm your mother stays out of it." She nodded. "Agreed." When she stood to leave, there was a lightness to her step I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. At the door, she paused and turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on us." I didn't answer, but when the door closed behind her, I found myself smiling just a little. Later that evening, I walked down to the cottage. Ethan was on the porch, repairing the latch on the screen door. He looked up, surprised to see me. "Lily said you talked," he said cautiously. "We did," I replied. "She's made a proposal. I'm considering it." He set his tools aside. "I just want you to know, I was wrong too. About a lot of things. About you. I didn't understand what it meant to really work for something, or to respect the person who gives you a chance." I nodded but didn't linger on his words. "If this goes forward, you'll be held to the same standards as everyone else here. No exceptions." "That's fair," he said, and for once, I believed him. As I walked back up the path toward the farmhouse, the air was crisp and carried the faint scent of wood smoke from somewhere down the road. The fields stretched out before me, the barn lights glowing softly against the encroaching dark. This land had saved me when I thought I was done for. Now, maybe, it could do the same for them, not because I was handing it to them, but because they were willing to earn it. And that, I thought, was the only way this would work. The first snow of winter had dusted the fields in white, the air crisp and bright under a pale blue sky. From the porch, I could see Lily and Ethan in the paddock, bundled in thick jackets, their breath visible in the cold. Lily stood beside Sophie, holding a feed bucket, while Ethan brushed down one of the mares, his movements slow and sure. A few months ago, they would have been arguing over whose turn it was to work, trying to pass the responsibility off on someone else. Now, They moved with quiet cooperation, pausing to check on each other, their voices low but warm. I watched as Ethan offered Lily his gloves when he saw her fingers had turned red, and she accepted with a small smile. There was no drama in it, no grand gesture, just simple care. I stepped down from the porch and made my way toward them, the snow crunching beneath my boots. As I reached the fence, I saw Sophie laughing at something Lily had said, and even the horses seemed more relaxed, shifting their weight in contentment. Ethan looked up and waved, his face flushed from the cold and the work. It struck me then how different they were from the couple who had arrived here in desperation, clinging to pride and excuses. The arrogance, the entitlement, it had been replaced by humility, gratitude, and a willingness to do their part, without complaint. That afternoon, we all worked together in the barn, Sophie mucking stalls, Ethan stacking hay, Lily measuring out grain. At one point, a sudden burst of laughter filled the air when one of the younger horses decided Ethan's hat looked like a snack and tried to snatch it right off his head. Lily doubled over, holding her belly as she laughed. Sophie joined in, and even I couldn't keep a straight face. The sound of it echoed through the rafters, warm and alive, as if the barn itself was joining in. When the chores were finished, we lingered a moment longer, leaning on the stall doors and breathing in the scent of hay and horses. I looked at them, my daughter, my son-in-law, and the young woman who had become like family, and I realized something. Blood may tie people together, but it isn't what makes a family. A family is built in the way you treat each other when there's nothing to gain, when the other person is at their weakest, when kindness costs you time, effort, or comfort, and you give it anyway. As we walked back toward the farmhouse, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the snow. Lily slipped her arm through mine, and Ethan carried the empty buckets without being asked. Behind us, the horses nickered softly, the barn glowing warm against the cold. For the first time in a long time, I felt the shape of our family settle into something steady and true, not perfect, but real. And in that moment, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. Looking back, I realized this experience taught me more than I ever expected. When Lily and Ethan first arrived, they were lost, burdened by pride, blind to the value of hard work, and expecting the world to make space for them without offering anything in return. I could have turned them away, but instead, I gave them the only thing that could truly change them: the chance to earn their place. It wasn't easy for them or for me, but somewhere between the early mornings, the blisters, and the quiet victories, they learned that respect is built through effort, not demanded by entitlement. And I learned, too, that love is not about shielding people from struggle, but about standing beside them while they face it, letting them grow through it. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who will work beside you, care for you when you're weak, and respect you when you're strong. We may have started this journey divided, but we ended it standing together, not because we had to, but because we chose to. In the end, the greatest gift we gave each other was not shelter, but dignity. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.